So my name is Chris Morris. I'm an archivist at the Computer History Museum. We are interviewing, Betty, say your last name for me.
Junod.
Junod. Okay, thank you. We're interviewing Betty Junod today, October 11th, 2023, for the VMware Founders Collection. This interview will become part of the collection at the Computer History Museum. Betty, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
For the record, can you tell us your current job title and your home base?
Yeah, so I'm currently the Vice President of Product Marketing for the VMware's Modern Apps and Management Group. So that's Tanzu and Aria portfolios. And I am based out of the Bay Area. So I live in San Francisco, and I'm based out of this office here in headquarters.
Tell us a little bit about your education and career path leading up to your first stint at VMware.
Yes. So I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose, so local kid. And I went to Santa Clara University. It's funny, I want to say I had a hard time graduating. But I graduated in finance and landed in technology because I got out of college during the dot-com boom. And then suffered the dot-com bust, as many of my peers did in the early 2000s. And I happened to then go work at a reseller for a company called CMango. They were doing they were a reseller for Remedy and BMC software. And through that, I met a lovely person who worked at BMC, named Julie Eads, and she's the one that brought me into VMware. She happened to join this new company. She left BMC and she joined this company, and she's like, "Wow, they're really growing, scaling." And I got to meet some folks, and then I joined what was the startings of their first kind of campaigns marketing team back in 2005, which seems like a lifetime ago.
So, how was this transition? Were you working in finance before that, and then transitioned to marketing, or you had been doing that?
I was trying to be practical. So I'm the first in my family to go to one of the first in my family to go to college in the States. My family immigrated to the Bay Area from Korea when I was 2. We've had other people like cousins and a grandparent who had studied in grad school here, but my parents were educated in Korea, moved here, and then so we went to school here. I thought I was being practical by doing the finance major, and then I did one internship at a brokerage, and I was like, this is not for me. Mm-hmm. Getting up at 5, working market hours, this is not for me. And so I just kind of happened into tech from because that was the boom at the time. Mm-hmm. I think what was great about it, though, is the curiosity. Because of the boom, you were able to kind of poke into this whole new thing about buying online, putting things on the internet, and what does that mean? I got really curious because I was an early customer of Webvan, and how do you make that work? And then going into this BMC reseller really made me start thinking about, oh, now you have this thing behind the scenes of that website that you interact with. There's a series of systems, they need to be connected, and when I fill out a form as a customer, it's doing all these other things across a web server, a database, et cetera. And then when I first met the folks at VMware, that was kind of like a bit of a, wait, what? It's so, someone I know coined it best, that's so esoteric. When it first came out, what do you mean? And I think the curiosity of it, because I was like, this is really interesting. I don't totally understand it. But then that kind of posed the challenge of okay, let's go and figure this out.
So what was your impression when you first arrived at VMware? Just your impression of the company, the culture, the people, when you first walked in the door?
It had this sense of we're onto something big, but we don't know yet. So we were somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 people. The marketing team at that time was very small. We were doing like a webinar for the first time. So, the early days, very early days. Nowadays, you could think about like, doing paid search like Google AdWords for a product is, of course. But it was early days of those things, and there was an excitement of doing something for the first time here. And part of that was trying to explain to IT professionals, like, why would you want your computer to act like 10 computers? So there was a lot of like, let's try this thing for the first time. Let's see how we can make this make sense to the average person. And it was a time of like a lot of early growth. So the company was growing very quickly. More people showed up every day. There was a big hyper growth period during that time. It was exciting.
What was the culture like in terms of just the vibe? You said excitement and this idea of doing something new for the first time. How did your team kind of work and gel?
I think we gelled pretty well. I think it was, from the marketing team at that time, we were kind of a centralized marketing team. We were trying things out for the first time, building campaigns for the first time, programs. And so it was what do you think about this? And people were bringing their different experiences together. I think one of the great things about VMware is that it's very, within the working teams, it was kind of consensus collaborative. That's something that I still see today. A lot of people reaching across to teams to talk to each other. You're able to bring ideas. You're able to also say, bring up like, oh, I don't know about that. How about this? I'm sure sometimes that can seem a little annoying when you're wanting to just get something done. But that's always been the thing that's kind of open and welcoming. I always feel like I can, say something.
Can you talk at all about any particular campaigns or endeavors that were particularly successful or that you were proud of from those early years?
Yeah, I'd say one of the things that always stands out to me is we had this little like Google AdWords thing when people were like, what is this AdWords thing? And we were spending like, maybe $30,000 a quarter. We had a few words up here and there, and I remember when we were really figuring out, wow, what is possible with something like this, especially for us to kind of gain some traction, and taking that and localizing that to like a bunch of different languages. So it was now international, and then scaling that program. And I remember submitting that PO, the contract, and trying to get that approved, and it got flagged all the way to like, I think Diane Green, because it's like, what is this $1 million PO? This is like the biggest marketing PO we've had. And that was kind of like, oh, sorry, that was me. But that really, at that period, that was kind of like when we were starting to really do larger scale programs, because the application of what VMware could do is like, this needs to reach the masses. So that's one. And then I have one more in that, is when we were working on, so something that I was in campaigns and I was working with John Gilmartin. This was like ages ago when we were making ESX free. Like it was such a big deal. And I remember us running lots of reports to like do the projections, and it was kind of like, okay, this is not like a free trial, but this is like our core product. We're gonna make it free. And running all those models and then getting it out there to see people adopting it. And I don't know, again, it's like a lot of firsts and just figuring it out, but then always having a great feeling of camaraderie to like, let's figure this problem out together. Yeah.
Tell me about that ESX free. I've read about it a bit, and it did seem like a somewhat bizarre idea that somehow really worked. Tell me how it worked and why it worked.
I think it was one of those things where the industry going to a point of like virtualization becoming more mainstream. So when you look at doing certain things, technology innovation, okay, we've innovated here. And then as VMware, we kept building on top of the core virtualization layer. But there's a point where I think there's competitive pressure if other people are doing that base layer. Also, do we say that now this is, well, everyone should have this? So the value needs to be for maybe other management, automation, other security, or the higher level features that we're going to do on top of this base. So there was a lot of like market pressure and such as well, because we were in a very competitive point at that time. But it was a big thing. So like, what does that mean? Like, will people still buy the other stuff that we have to run on top of? And you know, I think history proves now that yes, but it was one of those things. I remember running lots of different. We were running lots of different spreadsheets and projecting like what it could look like. Yeah.
Where did the genesis of that idea come from? Do you recall?
Oh, the specifics, no, because goodness, that was so long ago, so many years ago now. But you know, I do remember it was things like, you know, looking at competitiveness, and also like how do we seed more, you know, more of the market, and then you know, focusing on where we deliver value.
So during your first stint at VMware, can you describe kind of your career trajectory there during those 8 years?
Yeah, so I started in 2005. I think it was shortly after the EMC acquisition. And then I left in 2013. And what's funny is if I talk about it now, I get a lot of, wow, 8 years at a company, that seems like a lot, especially in the Bay Area. But it really just felt like a blink. So I started off in the kind of like central marketing programs and campaigns teams, doing those like webinars, AdWords, being part of our first ever like integrated campaigns. And then about halfway through, I switched over into product marketing for what was then a little like interesting use case that we saw some of our customers doing, running a desktop OS in a VM in the data center. And we said, that's odd. Why would they do that? And so it was one of the first like solutions, and that now is the end user computing business unit. And what that use case was VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. That then spawned other things on how do we then enable like, you know, end user productivity, like employee productivity through their, whether it's the applications delivered onto their laptops locally, if they need to like connect into desktops and applications that are served on centrally on the server. So my progression really went from executing and driving interest for these products to then continuously like my curiosity on it led to going on to the product side. I remember this moment of I was in the campaigns team and I was running the campaigns for the VDI team. And you know, with the campaigns, it's like you have emails and advertisements and all, where people sign up for events or white papers. And I remember going to the product marketing leader and saying like, I need a white paper that says these exact topics. And he basically said, just join this team and write it yourself. And I said, okay. And so that was a turning point. And I've kind of stayed on that side of the house ever since.
So I'm wondering about the process whereby you really ingest and understand the technical component of these products so that you can write that white paper and design effective outreach.
Yeah, so my intake process is a little bit messy, but for me, I like to, honestly, the source of truth is the product documentation, so I still do that today, especially if I'm on a new team or joined a new company type of thing, as I go to the documentation. Because if you can't, that has to be the place where you explain to like someone like, this is how you actually use our widget. So there's that. You know, I love spending time with product and engineering teams, and just my thing is like asking a million questions, and then being that translation layer to say that like, hey, you're building this amazing thing with all these lines of code. It does all of these features and functions, but to someone who hasn't been living and breathing this exact piece of technology, we can't often describe it the way they describe it, because they're not going to have the context of living that feature or that feature area for, I don't know, 6 months or a year. So it's a lot of like internally facing information gathering, and the number one question to ask is why? What does the customer do today to solve this problem? How do they solve it? And how are we solving it differently? What is their actual like number of clicks, number of keyboard strokes actually look like before and after? And then it's, talking to people who are our customers, the end users, right? Whether they're actually using our thing or somebody else's product, the marketing is like building that bridge between with language.
Mm-hmm. So you left VMware in 2013. What did you do? Where did you go?
I went to startup land, and I was in startup land for about almost a decade. And so I went from VMware to, notably, I went to Docker, which I joined pretty early. It was less than 100 people when I joined Docker, and I was there for about 4.5 years. And then once I went there, I then went to a startup in service mesh, so staying in that containerization type of ecosystem. And then I came back. I was recruited back by another fellow boomerang, and yeah, I have a soft spot in my heart for this place.
So what were your takeaways from your time in startup land that you can apply in this time at VMware now?
I think one of it is perspective. It was, and another one is just see where the movement of technology was going. So when I left VMware, it was like, I joined VMware, it was about 1,000, 1,500 people. I left VMware, I think we were 20,000 people. Mm-hmm. And it was through a VMware connection that I got introduced to Docker. And that opened a whole new world for me on developers, the developer and the ecosystem of tools in there, open source, this current generation of open source that we're living in, and understanding and like this whole new level of abstraction that's been introduced. And I think my understanding of VMware helped with kind of setting those, going in with already some context from a technology aspect of what it's doing, and then the impact to the ecosystem now that if you abstract one layer above, the hardware, now what? Which is what led me to Solo. Mm-hmm. But the perspective is really like, it opened my eyes to not just like the infrastructure side, but now like the application workflow. Like VMware is great, virtualization is great, but what some of the stuff with especially Docker and Solo, that whole ecosystem exposed to me is like, what's going to be inside that container? What's going to be inside that VM, and how that was changing, and the impact that had across any industry, because ultimately products are products, and how we engage with people and companies is through software, and that was changing rapidly.
What was the how could you compare the culture when you came back to VMware versus how it had been in your first stint?
It was so much bigger. I mean, it was almost twice as big as when I left. What was amazing is that there were still enough pockets of folks that I had worked with before that were kind of sprinkled across the company. So it was, in many ways, a warm welcome. That was wonderful. There is outside, I mean, a lot of it is very similar. It's just at a bigger scale. And some of it was navigating almost, 38,000 people when I rejoined, and during a pandemic when nobody was going into the office. That was interesting. Yeah. But having a few folks across the company that were still familiar was especially helpful. Because that whole thing of like, oh, hey, let me fill you in on what's been going on. And, oh, here's some people you should talk to for this and that. Like that part was the same from before. Yeah.
Tell us about your roles. What are you focusing on now?
Yeah, so I'm in one of the business groups, and I look after the product marketing, technical marketing, and developer relations functions for these products. And so it's, in many ways, it's like the culmination of the technologies I've represented across my last few jobs, as well as the functional roles I've done into one. You know, it's a group of really lovely people. We have a mix of like mature products as well as new products. So I get both the startup feel as well as, helping kind of be part of caretaking a larger business. So that's really cool because we sit like kind of one foot in either side of like the transformations that are happening for our customers.
How do these products that you're working on, and some of these are very new, right, for VMware, kind of really new directions. So how do those areas, how do you see them fitting in with the larger, I guess, the other offerings that VMware has that are maybe more in their traditional sort of zone?
Yeah, so and I think this is where it's kind of this nice intersection from my past history. So working at VMware in the earlier days, I understand what we've done on the infrastructure virtualization side, and the virtual machine being the unit of compute now. The things I was doing at Docker and Solo really map well to some of the parts of the Tanzu portfolio I'm responsible for because we have application platform. It's an interesting intersection because it is what we're doing within modern apps and management is we're helping build and deliver apps, whether they land on a VM, that's a VMware VM. It could be in a AWS, VM, right? I mean, the cloud is made of virtual machines, let's be clear. There's not like magical like elves back there, like building servers on the fly when someone picks an instance size. It is like, it's the part of like delivering things to those environments, and one of them are VMware environments, and then also being able to manage across those. So I think it's again, back to like, infrastructure is fundamentally virtualized, but we need to then manage those, and we need to deliver workloads to those. So I feel that it's still very well connected. It's just landing it in VMware as well as in non-VMware environments.
Let me just refer to my questions a little bit. Are there any particular projects or programs that you point to with special pride at VMware?
Are there any programs that are something, a project that I point to with particular pride? One of the ones is when I was in the VDI team, now end user computing, that is like maybe 2008 or 9 to 13, we were building a new business on top of vSphere, right? Stuff you can run on top of vSphere. However, the profile in the customer, the teams in the customer that we would sell to, the use cases were vastly different than who we were selling vSphere to. So that was interesting because we were selling VDI to people who own desktop infrastructure. Different teams, different budget, and also like different set of competitors. And also that meant a different set of partners that we have to work with, like different expertise we needed. So one of the things we did there was to pilot out, like, instead of going to like the large base of existing VMware partners, let's find like what are the specialized skills we need to make this work. Some of them will come from here, some of them won't. We need to recruit new ones, and we put together a program on what does that mean. That later became, we piloted that, we showed some success, we put some things around it. It was at a smaller scale because we were getting something off the ground, but later that became the solution competency program. That was, so I'd like to say that this was a grounds for that, and then they were able to, the company was able to do that for many different solutions. So that's something that I'm really proud of. Again, back to the things you get to do when a company's kind of in their earlier days, we get to try things and you find something that works, and then can that be applied to other areas of the company?
Who are some of the people who've had the biggest impact on your career at VMware?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I mean, there isn't just one. You know, like, gosh, Yale Zhang, she was a early marketing VP here, and she was a very, very strong supporter of my work, also great feedback. Karthik Rao, who's also an early executive here, who then I went to work for a bit when he was at Signal Effects. Just there's amazing people who see you differently than you see yourself, and so they're always putting you in places that you didn't think to go. Raj Malampati and Vittorio Viarengo, kind of for always pushing me to do the next thing. If I think about some of the early folks, those were some big impacts, because I think that set me on a different trajectory as I was kind of advancing, you know, from my 20s to my 30s. And then I'd say like Jerry Chen, who I also worked for early on, who then went on to become a venture capitalist, who was the one who introduced me to Docker. So whether through like suggesting I try a new role, this other project, or kind of pushing me to, you know, come back to VMware, or introducing me to another company, those folks had some pivotal moments that directed my career. Oh my gosh, how can I forget Julie Eads? Without her, I never would have ended up at VMware. Yes. I mean, there's so many people to thank, but I think those are some of the folks that had very direct impact on my path here, within here, as well as kind of like the turns I've taken in between.
The last question I have on my list is, what do you think is the lasting impact of VMware's technology?
Oh gosh, the lasting impact. It is, I mean, it is what VMware has done is like, it is as fundamental as like the first computer, right? You know, virtualization itself, like, you know, what it was doing has lived before in non-x86 environments, but because it lived in mainframes, et cetera. But doing this on commodity hardware made this accessible to everyone. And so it is in every data center that runs all the most important applications. Everything that we ever interact with in software is likely running on VMware. Even in the public clouds, they're likely not running VMware, but like the concept of virtualization is in all those clouds. So, and it's the same thing that happened at like Docker, like, you know, containerization is something that's lived in the Linux kernel a long time, but what Docker did was make it accessible to the masses in an easy way. What VMware did is is that at a different level, and then by having that understanding, that abstraction understanding, like look at all the other things that have come from it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's as important as when somebody just like made the computer, like from like a piece of hardware for the first time.
Those are all the questions I have. Do you have anything else that you want to share?
Oh, I want to say this is such a special place, and it is the thing that has. I might get a little choked up thinking about it. Was an amazing 8 years at kind of the early part of my career, and they have given so many people so many opportunities. Has changed an entire industry, and then to think about all the people who have gone on from here and what all they have been able to do and how they've been able to remain connected. I think what you see is like the true friendships and stuff that have lived on beyond here, the mentorships, the friendships, is one of the things that is like, it has made it's a significant impact to my life, professionally and personally. And I think that's really that's the nice thing. I have some amazing friends who now I can say that we've been friends for decades, just because we happened to meet through here. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Betty.
Thank you.